This video was brought to you by my loyal patrons. Pledge today and receive exclusive perks. Link in the description. On page 124 of The Island of Sodor, Its People, History, and Railways, the text states, "The Northwestern Railway has some 80 locomotives with which to work its system." Can you think of 80 engines that exist on the Northwestern Railway, let alone all the railways of Sodor combined? The Railway series lore is so fascinating. We know the characters that feature in the stories. We know Thomas and Gordon and Percy and Edward and Toby, of course, and even the obscure other railway engines like Skarloey or Culdee. But Sodor does host a full operating railway network, and while we focus on certain faces, there's a ton of other ones that exist in the background to keep things moving. Ones that never get talked about. And sometimes we'll get lucky if we catch a glimpse of them in an illustration. Like those other engines in the shed in Edward's Day Out. Or this guy that kinda looks like James but isn't. Or that blue freak in the background here. Or this guy. Who on earth even is this guy? These Glup Shadows at least got the privilege of being seen in illustrations. But what about the ones that don't? These ones are a level below Glup Shadows. These are what I call cryptids. This is a video on Sodor's cryptid engines. Characters who have only been mentioned in deep lore materials like old lectures or notes, or exist in some form such as models on Wilbert Awdry's layouts. The obscurest of obscure characters that have never been seen or photographed, and only exist in canon because, well, and Awdry said they did. I'm gonna go through these in order of, yeah, I've heard of them, to, who now? I have talked about a few cryptid engines in other videos, like Walter or Bloomer, so I'll skip over them here, just for the sake of not repeating myself. Now, of course, all you diehards watching this are going to know all of these. I'm not revealing any new information here. But regardless, I see this as a fun opportunity to talk about some very elusive characters that I don't think I'd ever talk about otherwise. I mean, what other video could I possibly talk about Elsie the luggage van in, right? Alrighty then, let's get started. The other Mid-Sodor engines. In the 25th book of the series, Duke the Lost Engine, we were introduced to the now long-defunct Mid-Sodor Railway, and met 4 of the engines who once ran it. Duke, Falcon, Stuart, and number 2, aka Stanley, or Smudger, as he's called in the TV series. But it is mentioned in text, albeit very briefly, that they were not the only ones.
Other engines came and went, but Duke outlasted them all.
These other engines never appeared in illustrations, and we know so very little about them as far as any lore books are concerned. The Island of Sodor book gives us no other details, other than there were 6 left in 1936, when the railway was facing difficulties and had to sell some off. That being said, we do know their names and what all of them look like in the form of models on Wilbur Awdry's own Mid-Sodor railway layout. The Mid-Sodor had quite the engine roster, and it is a bit confusing because it changed quite a bit over time. The 3 other engines on the railway that were sold off in 1936 were number 5, Albert. Wilbert had several models made of Albert. At one point, Albert resembled a Falcon 040 saddle tank similar to Falcon, until ultimately being retconned into this side tank design with a maroon livery. The design is freelance using a Gem Type B Vari kit. Albert's job on the railway was pulling a passenger service called the Parliamentary, often shortened to the Parley. The old model of Albert was turned into a spare nameless engine for the layout, and was painted blue. Number 6 was Jim. Like Albert, he is a freelance design made using the same Gem Type B Vari kit. Jim hauled the slow goods train called the Horse and Cart, which stopped at each and every halt to drop off or take on goods. Like a horse and cart, hence its name. Number 7 was Tim, and like the other 2, is also a freelance design made using that same Gem Type B Vari kit. Tim, however, was fitted with side skirts for tramway running, and pulled the workman trains to the Kosnyhowen mine. He apparently took over the job from Stanley after he was turned into a pumping engine. There was also the mine engine, an engine with no name and worked solely at the Casny-Howen mine. It was French in design, based on a Ducaville Type 1 040 side tank. The ultimate fate of this engine is unknown, but it can be presumed it was scrapped after the Casny-Howen mine shut down. There are also several other named engines that once existed on the layout, but were retired as characters. These include number 5 Jerry, which resembled the 060 side tanks produced by Andrew Barclay. Number 6 John, which resembled a Bagnall 040 design. He was completely dismantled and his chassis was reused for Stewart. Number 7 Jennings, which is very similar in design to the Tallyclin's Dalgach and existed as an example of a Fletcher Jennings locomotive on the layout. And 2 American Baldwin saddle tanks called Alfred and Atlas. All these were either turned into spare engines or were broken up and had their parts reused for others. Their actual status of being considered canon is ambiguous as far as I know, but I see no reason to believe that these aren't some of the engines that came and went over the years on the Mid-Sodor. If you'd like to learn more about the Mid-Sodor's roster and history, I highly recommend watching Mid-Sodor Mysteries, Lore, Layouts, and Locomotives by Luke Ryan, where everything is explained in detail. The coffee pots. Now you're probably familiar with the coffee pots, hence why they're fairly high up on this list. They were a fleet of vertical boiler engines that worked one of the earlier railways on Sodor, the Tidmouth, Knapford and Elsbridge Light Railway, previously the Knapford and Elsbridge Railway. They were nicknamed coffee pots because of their vertical boilers that stuck up in the air like a coffee pot, and they were also prone to coughing up brown water from their stacks. The coffee pots technically made an appearance in the TV series in the form of Glyn. Glyn was the first of the coffee pot engines and worked on what is now Thomas's branch line. He was the last of the fleet in service, but wore out and was long forgotten about. Thankfully though, he was never scrapped, and after being rediscovered, Glyn was restored to working order, and now resides at the Ulfstead Castle estate. Glyn's design was based on the real-life coffee pot number 1, built for the Dorking Greystone Lime Company, and is currently preserved at the Beamish Museum. Glyn even wears the same red livery as it. Fun fact, it worked at the same quarry as Captain Baxter from the Bluebell Railway. That's right, Baxter and real-life Glyn were work buddies. Small world, innit? The coffee pots of the Railway series were very different creatures to Glyn, and were only ever mentioned to exist in some of the lore books. They were pretty cryptic to the fandom, until only a couple years ago, when one of Wilbur's lectures, Railways of Sodor, was unearthed and read aloud at one of the Aubrey extravaganza events at the Tallyclin Railway. There were 4 coffee pots in total, and they all were built at different times. The first engine was built circa 1905, in accordance with the railway's extension to Tidmouth via a track that ran around the headlands. Designed by a young Topham Hatt I, this engine was essentially a portable boiler attached to a wagon chassis. Imagine Trevor, but the bottom half of him is a wagon. That's basically what this looked like. It was a real ramshackle thing that barely worked, with a top speed of 6 miles per hour. Its boiler ran out after only a couple years, so Hatt redesigned it with a vertical boiler instead, encased in a wooden cab, and the nickname Coffee Pot emerged. Wilbert used slides of the real-life Coed Talon Colliery locomotive called Express in his lecture to give an idea of what it looked like. This contraption of an engine eventually gave out around 1910, and so a second engine was built to replace it. The second coffee pot was a lot more conventional in its design, with a ship's donkey engine attached to a strengthened chassis. Wilbert used slides of the real-life vertical boiler engines that worked at Falmouth Docks in the 1860s in his lecture to depict it. 2 more coffee pots were built not long after, and their designs are unknown, though they were likely similar to number 2. The Elsbridge and Knapford Railway eventually became the Farquhar branch after all of the Sodor's railways amalgamated, and they saw the rest of their working lives hauling wagons to and from the Farquhar Quarry along the tramway. They lasted surprisingly long, even after Thomas took over the main duties on the branch line, being kept as backup engines. but the final one gave out in the early 1950s, hence why Thomas was used to haul the quarry trains along the tramway for a short spell, and it was on one of those trips that he had his run-in with that grouchy constable. The coffee pots are all scrapped now, with their cryptid legacy shrouded in mystery. That is until earlier this year, when Christopher Aubrey revealed some new info about them in an email to fellow fans Sodor Island models. He revealed all 4 of their names. The first contraption was named Silas, the second Clarice, the third Clifford, and the fourth Conrad. I like how the weird contraption one is the only one not with a C name, because it really was the odd one out of the bunch. He also mentioned that the coffee pots had no discernible livery, as their paint was always covered up by their coughed up brown water. Since we're on Thomas's branch line, let's now talk about Elsie. Now we all know Toby the Tram Engine and his faithful coach wife Henrietta, a duo that we all love and rarely see split up. But what if I told you there is officially a third member in their little group? Elsie is Toby's luggage van and is always connected to their train on their journeys. She has never been depicted in any illustrations and was only confirmed to exist via a brief mention in the Island of Sodor book, and as a model on Wilbert's Farquhar layout, which still exists today. She is based on, and maybe even canonically is, the Whiz Beach and Upwell's luggage van number 9. Like the case with many obscure characters such as Bloomer, Elsie exists in the canon simply because Wilbert wanted a model of the luggage van on his layout. And the general rule of thumb is, if it exists on his layout, then it exists in the canon. We know very little about how Elsie came to Sodor. The obvious assumption is that, like Toby and Henrietta, she was saved by the Fat Controller and came along to Sodor with them in 1951. However, the real-life luggage van number 9 has a bit of a colorful history. Circa 1903, it was found to be inadequate for the Whiz Beach and Upwell's needs, and was transferred to a different line. What happened to it after that is unknown, at least as far as I could find. I'd like to think that Elsie was found at a much later date, and the Fat Controller brought her to Sodor to join Toby and Henrietta. That's all speculation and headcanon, of course, but no doubt that there's a fun story to be told there. Nowadays, Elsie travels along with them on their daily runs to the quarry. She makes up a part of Toby's vintage train, which features Henrietta, herself, and now Victoria, a Furness Railway coach, who joined them in 2007. Toby is quite the ladies' man, isn't he? Completely off topic, but while reading up on Elsie, I made this realization that I never thought twice about before. On page 37 of the Island of Sodor book, it states that after Daisy arrived on the branch, Toby, Henrietta, and Elsie all started shedding at Knapford. Like, am I reading this right? You mean to tell me that that shed in the background at Knapford Junction is Toby's shed? So Toby has his own little shed here, just like in the TV series. It's just at Knapford. That's crazy. And it makes sense too. On Wilbert's timetable for the branch, it lists Toby's train leaving out of Knapford going up the line. It is a bit inconsistent though, because Toby is depicted shedding at Farquhar like a bazillion times in the books. Maybe he only stays at Farquhar during the day between trains or something. I've never seen him, or anyone, use that shed at Knapford before. Anyways, tangent over. Moving on. Sigrid and the Blisters. That's not a bad band name, actually. The Arlesdale Railway is a 15-inch miniature railway on the west coast of Sodor, and was built atop the old trackbed of the Mid-Sodor Railway. The railway was heavily based on the real-life Ravenglass and Eskdale Railway in the Lake District, with all its engines all having similar-sounding names to their real-life counterparts. Bert, River Ert, Rex, River Esk, and Mike, River Might. We met 2 other engines on the railway in Book 34, Jock the New Engine, the titular Jock, and a diesel called Frank. But there are actually 8 engines on this little railway. 3 have never been depicted, and are only mentioned in the Island of Sodor book. The first 2 were actually the first 2 engines on the line, a pair of 4-wheel diesel tractors brought in to help construct the line, called Blister 1 and Blister 2. Following the completion of the line, the pair are kept on hand for maintenance work. They are described as painted black, with black and white wasp stripes on their ends. They get their names from their builder, R.A. Lister, but it's also speculated that they're called as such for their difficulties starting up on cold mornings. Blisters 1 and 2 are based on the Ravenglass's Cyril, a small diesel shunter. Unlike on Sodor, there is only one Cyril on the Ravenglass. These guys really are cryptids. The fact they don't have their own names is really funny to me. I picture them as the Thing 1 and Thing 2 of the Thomas universe, these two mute, mischievous creatures that just roam the railway and cause havoc. The 8th locomotive is also a diesel, Sigrid of Arlesdale, or just Sigrid for short. Sigrid was built in 1969 and is described wearing a two-tone blue livery. She pulls the first train of the day, taking the line's employees to their places of work before opening, and then hauls the last train of the day to bring everyone home. She was named after Sigrid, an 11th century local heroine on Sodor, who led the defeat of the Norman invasion in 1094. I imagine being named after such a Sodor legend makes Sigrid quite full of herself. She is based on the Ravenglass's Sheila of Eskdale. Despite these characters' obscurity, all have been depicted as characters at the Ravenglass for Day Out with Thomas events in the past, with Sheila even wearing a Sigrid of Arlesdale nameplate. Cause all the kids going to these things know who that is, right? The Wellsworth and Suddery engines. Well, we talked about the coffee pots. Now it's time for their neighbors, the Wellsworth and Suddery engines. The Wellsworth and Suddery Railway was one of the 3 early standard gauge railways on Sodor. It was first built in 1870, connecting Wellsworth and the island's capital city, Suddery, via a short railway line. The railway expanded over time, extending south to Brendam in the early 1900s, and eventually connecting up to the Tidmouth, Knapford, and Elsbridge Light Railway in 1912. Being a railway, it of course had its own engines, and they are only oh so briefly mentioned in passing in the Island of Sodor book, confirming 4 060 tank engines. For a long time there was much speculation on what these engines were exactly. Wilbert's Railways of Sodor lecture revealed more information. The railway opened with 2 locomotives at first, a pair of 060 saddle tanks from Manning Wardle. I don't think we know the exact class of saddle tank that these 2 were. At the time there were only 3 produced under Manning Wardle. Regardless of which specific class they were, the first 2 engines were a pair of Manning Wardle saddle tanks. And funnily enough, the TV series also has a pair of its own Manning Wardle saddle tanks. Oh, the fan headcanons went wild when this info was revealed. The third engine came later in 1881, and it was a rather obscure design, a Sharp Stewart 060 side tank, of the same designs that worked the Cornwall Minerals Railway. The engine would later be sent back when the railways amalgamated, to have a 4-wheel tender added to it, to adequately run the new longer distance work. The 4th locomotive's design is unknown, and was brought into the canon later in that passing mention in the Island of Sodor book. All we know is that it is an 060, and many fans have speculated it to be a Terrier, aka the same class of engine as Stepney, but it's all up to your own interpretation. Such unusual engines, right? 2 unspecified Manning Wardles, a tank engine turned tender engine, and some mystery one. Christopher later revealed their names. The first 2 were Reuben and Theodore, the tender engine was Julius, and the 4th one, Willie. He also confirmed that their liveries were light blue. Seems the Wellsworth and Suddery set the precedent for the Northwestern standard blue livery, huh? Makes enough sense, since the other engines at the time, the coffee pots, didn't really have a livery to pull from. All 4 engines survived into Northwestern Railway ownership in 1914, and were all scrapped sometime after 1919. We don't know the exact years. So if you want a headcanon that some of the blue freaks running around in the background of the early books as Wellsworth and Suddery engines, well, there certainly is a precedent for it. I wonder how Edward, Thomas, Henry, etc. all felt about what were their peers at the time being broken up. The Sodor lore can get a bit dark the deeper you read into it. Ivo's Flying Bedsteads. The second station on the Skarloey Railway is the small village of Krosny Kieran. At the station, there is a lonely siding, and often stored on this siding is well, we'll call it a trolley. The Scarloway Railway's chief mechanical engineer was a man named Ivo Hugh, often called Mr. Hugh by the engines. He was the man that Ivo Hugh the engine was named after. Mr. Hugh lived in a cottage at Crosney Kearn. Every morning he'd walk to the station and would drive his trolley down the line to Crovan's Gate to go to work, and whenever he needed to go up the line quickly to inspect something. This trolley was basically the Scarloway Railway's version of Winston from the TV series. The trolley is a small petrol-driven contraption that he assembled together himself using spare parts from the engine workshops. The trolley was lovingly nicknamed Ivo's Flying Bedstead by the railway staff. The current trolley is his 5th one, actually. He had 4 other ones prior to it. The trolley is based on Toby, a petrol trolley on the Tallyclin Railway designed by its chief mechanical engineer, John Bate. First built in 1954, it was a simple, practical thing, a gearbox connected to a custom chassis to transport a half-dozen men, and sometimes a couple wagons, up and down the line when needed. It originally had no roof, and was given one in 1960. The work crews noticed that its new boxy look resembled Toby the tram engine, and so nicknamed him Toby as such. So the Flying Bedstead from the Railway series was based on something in real life, which itself was named after something from the Railway series. Art imitates life, life imitates art. It's all an endless cycle. Toby was restored to working order in 2019, and is currently still in service on the Tallyclin Railway. I feel like the Flying Bedstead rides the line of what can and can't be alive in the Railway series. It was just thrown together by someone out of spare parts, but it is technically a locomotive on rails with an engine and a means of propelling itself, so there's absolutely no good reason it shouldn't be alive, right? It makes me wonder how things like motor scooters or, hell, model trains work in this universe. Would those be alive? We're getting deep in the weeds here. This is a whole discussion for another video. Moving on. The electric engines. Everything so far we've had description of or solid ideas of what the engines look like. Now we're starting to enter territory where that's all up for debate. In 1923, the Peel Godred Power Company was granted permission to build a dam and a hydroelectric plant north of the town. Problem was, there was no way to easily get the bulky machines and building materials there. The nearby Mid-Sodor Railway didn't have the clearance, and the roads up the valley were not suitable. So they struck a deal with the North Western Railway. They would build a standard gauge electric branch line up the valley from Kildane to transport the building materials, with the power company paying for half the construction costs. Since then, this branch line has served the town of Peel Godred. It is the only branch on Sodor to use electric traction, which of course is powered by the power company. The overhead catenary lines were once seen in an illustration of Book 37, Henry and the Express. As it is powered by electricity, naturally a fleet of electric engines run this line, but we have never seen them. One did officially appear in the final book in the story Gordon's Fire Service. Gordon arrives at Kildane with his new stopping train service, and witnesses an electric engine pull into the platform next to him. It caught his attention, for it was eerily silent and made no noise. The illustrations do not depict this interaction, unfortunately. Both Wilbert and Chris have given different reasons for why these engines never appeared in stories. Wilbert said it's because he found electric engines dull and lacked personality.
They see diesels and they see electric trains. But you didn't write about those, even though you were still writing the books 10 years ago. Why?
Didn't,
What's wrong with them?
Well, they're dull. They haven't got any personality.
Chris, however, stated it's because the Railway series primarily focuses on the northwest of Sodor. Yeah, the Scarloway engines would like a word with you, sir. Sodor, reading between the lines, states that the freight traffic on the line is hauled by engines that resemble Class 86s and 87s. What carries the passenger traffic is unknown. Realistically, it'd likely be run by EMU sets of some sort. But funnily enough, our only glimpse at an electric engine in any official Thomas media ever was in a railway safety book called More Bad Days for Thomas and His Friends. One is seen in the background of this illustration, and it looks like this. I love it. It's so simple. Someone needs to make this in Trains or Roblox. It's so dopey looking. It somewhat resembles a Class 90 or 91, which are passenger locos, so I guess that's our passenger traction. And funnily enough, an actual Class 91 in real life was named after Wilbur Awdry, number 91124, and it's still in service today. All of these engines are fairly recent ones though, with the 86s first being built in the 60s. What types of electric engines ran the line when it was first built is completely unknown at this time. Some early British electric locos designed for freight work of that time period include the Class EF1, built in 1914 by the North Eastern Railway. It was a class of 10, and they all survived into British Railways ownership. The final one held on till 1964, when it was finally scrapped. There was also the steeple cab ES1s, also built by the North Eastern Railway in 1903. Two were built to work a rather steep line down to the Harbour Quays in Newcastle. One is preserved, and is a part of the National Collection. Aubrey. So this one was dropped on us completely out of nowhere. As we found out last year in the reissue of Sodor Reading Between the Lines, Sodor now has a preservation society, known as the Crovan's Gate Preservation Society. When they formed, they had only one engine, Neil, presented to them by Richard Hatt. Earlier this year, fellow fan Sodor Island Models was in an email correspondence with Christopher Awdry. He asked him some further questions about the society, and Christopher responded saying that they had acquired a second engine, an 040 well tank named Aubrey, who was at one point owned by the North Western Railway. Well, damn, okay. What a crazy drop. Are we just making up engines at this point? I mean, who on earth is Aubrey the well tank engine? Christopher provided no further specifics, though I wouldn't be surprised if he reveals more information at a later date. But, of course, that won't stop us from speculating. Okay, so why does this society have an 040 well tank? Well tanks are a pretty ancient design. They're a type of tank engine that carries their water in a tank or well under their footplate within its frames. They're designed this way to give the engine a lower center of gravity and give it better traction. However, they were rather uncommon in standard gauge, for having the tank here limited their water capacity, and thus distance of travel. They were a lot more common in narrow gauge. Renius and his real-life counterpart, Dalgok, are relevant examples of a well tank locomotive. So why would the North Western Railway have had one of these? Here's my little headcanon. She, and I'm assuming Aubrey is a she, was a contractor engine, and was brought in to help construct the railway after all three railways on Sodor amalgamated, putting her into North Western ownership. After its completion, Aubrey was kept as the work shunter at Crovan's Gate for several years. After time passed, she wore out, and was replaced with a diesel shunter of sorts. Aubrey was kept in storage for some time, until eventually being presented to the Crovan's Gate Preservation Society. A fitting place for an engine who spent most her working life in Crovan's Gate. She may not be in operational condition today, but hey, she's still around. What comes to my mind when I try to picture Aubrey is something akin to the King, a rather chunky preserved 040 well tank that lives at the Ribble Steam Railway. This class of engine was built between the late 1800s and 1910, placing it in a similar-ish time period to the railways on Sodor expanding and amalgamating. But that's just my own preference. I'd like to hope that we'll learn more about this character at a later time. Speaking of Christopher dropping random characters on us, the Pannier. Since the very beginning of the series, the North Western Railway's main terminus station has always had a pilot engine. The engine stationed there specifically to shunt the trains. The first was Thomas, back when the terminus was at Vickerstown. When Tidmouth became the new terminus and Thomas moved to his branch line, James temporarily took over the pilot duties. And when the tender engines all complained about shunting their own coaches, the Fat Controller brought along Percy. But in the 50s, Knapford Harbour was rebuilt, and Percy was taken away to help with that. So Duck was brought in from Paddington to be the new pilot. And he held the role until 1965 or so, when the branch to Arlesborough was reopened, and Duck was asked to run it. We've seen so many engines take over the role in the TV series. Stafford seemed to be the pilot engine for a while, and then Philip came along and has remained the official pilot until the end of the series. But there was never a mention of anyone taking over the role after Duck in the books. So many fans, myself included, have always wondered, who became Tidmouth's pilot? Christopher gave us the answer also in his email response to Sodor Island Models, in which he claimed that Duck's successor was another 060 Pannier tank engine. And that's it. That's all we got. No specific basis or any indication of when it got there, or even a name. Just that it's another Pannier tank. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if he gives us more information at a later time. This is interesting. The specific mention of it being a Pannier tank really narrows down what sort of engine it could be. More than likely, it's another of Great Western origin, as no other railway really used Pannier tanks in the numbers that they did. It's possible it's another standard 5700 class like Duck, but I personally find that to be really uncreative. A more interesting contender could be the 9400 class, the final class of steam engine built by the Great Western before nationalization. These found work all over the western region, being used for shunting and banking duties on inclines. Another contender, and my personal pick, is the 1500 class, these rather chunky 060 Panniers. They're a bit similar in design to the 9400s, but have outside valve gear that gives them a rather brawny look. Only 10 were built, and they were designed to be pilot engines. Despite being Great Western designs, all of them were built by British Railways in 1949 after nationalization, so they never worked under the Great Western name. Unfortunately, they didn't last that long in service, only around 10 years or so, before diesels took over their work. Many of them were scrapped while still in serviceable condition. 3 of them found a new life at Coventry Colliery in Warwickshire, where they were repainted red. One of these 3 survives today on the Severn Valley Railway, number 1501, which uses parts salvaged from the other 2. I'd like to think that the Tidmouth Pannier is one of the other 2 that went to the colliery, and was brought to Sodor after its time there ended, which would have been in 1969-ish, so not too long after Duck left for his branch line. And as a shunter its whole life, I think it'd fit the bill as a pilot engine quite well. And having never served under the Great Western, it does not carry that same pride of its ancestry that Duck and Oliver have, and does not wear a heritage livery like them. Again, I can totally see some story potential there. The Brendam Push-Pulls. Now we're getting into super cryptic territory. These are engines that we're not even totally sure exist or not. Edward's branch line is worked mainly by 2 engines. Edward himself, of course, and Boko, the big friendly diesel. Oh, but they may not be the only engines that work this line. On page 26 of the Island of Sodor book, it states, "The line is known in the books as Edward's branch line, and latterly Boko has been engaged to assist. But these 2 are by no means the only motive power employed. Through passenger services for commuters to and from Tidmouth are provided between 8 and 10 a.m. and 5 to 7 p.m. This service is supplemented at other times by push-pull trains from Wellsworth." For those unaware, a push-pull is a train consist that is configured in a way so the engine does not have to run around its train to the other end to pull it when they reach the end of the line. It can simply just push the train backwards, and the driver stands in the coach at the front of the train. Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle are canonically a push-pull set. In several illustrations, Thomas is depicted wearing a red lamp, indicating that he's pushing the train, and he is at the back of it. It's also why Clarabelle has those windows on the sides of her face, so the driver can see ahead when she's traveling forwards. Duck and Oliver's auto trains on the Little Western are also push-pulls. So unless the Fat Controller borrows Duck or Thomas or someone to run the Brendam branch during these other times, which isn't out of the realm of possibility, it would seem to indicate that the line must have its own tank engine or 2 to run these push-pull trains from Wellsworth to Brendam. As far as what designs of engines these could be, we have so little here to go off of, but there were several tank engines across the UK designed for or performed push-pull work. To name a few, there were the Great Western's auto tanks, of course, aka Oliver, Ginties, the Southeastern and Chatham Railway's H classes, the London and Southwestern Railway's M7 tanks, and the LMS Ivet 2MTs, aka Arthur. Interesting. Do with this information as you will. The Quarry Locomotives. And we've come to probably the most cryptic engines on Sodor there are, the mysterious locomotives of the narrow gauge quarries. The Skarloey Railway was built to serve the slate quarry network in Ward Fell. Engines brought empty wagons up, and then brought loaded ones down to have their slate transferred into standard gauge trains. But the slate quarry was not the only one that the line served, for there was a smaller quarry dugout north of the station at Rennius. The narrow gauge rails and Sodor lecture gave us the details. Slate was discovered here in 1951. The slate was notably pure and free of metallic substances, making it excellent for use in things like electric switchboards. The hydroelectric plant at Peel Godred made use of it, and this little quarry helped keep the Skarloey Railway afloat during its twilight years. But you know what's not mentioned in the lecture? The engines that work this quarry. Oh no, the locomotives that work here were only mentioned in notes made by Wilbur Aubrey himself, found in his study, as stated here by Luke Ryan.
It's just a fun tidbit. I think in like one of the lectures, or it's in like a bit of writing about the Rennius Quarry, basically says there's like little electric locos that are at the Rennius Quarry.
The engines that work this quarry are a pair of, presumably a pair, who knows how many there actually are, of tiny narrow gauge battery locomotives that sort the wagons about. I have very little idea of what these itty bitty locomotives would even look like. They could pretty much be anything. Luke described them as probably something akin to number 9 on the Chorus Railway, a tiny battery locomotive that once sorted wagons at Abercliffeny Slate Quarry. As mysterious as these locomotives are, there is one more locomotive that's a bit more elusive than them. And this is one that I actually would, without a doubt, call a cryptid. Wilbur even describes this thing as beetle-like. The main Skarloey Railway slate quarry went out of business in 1953. The railway sold the quarry to the Ministry of Defense, who expressed interest in using it for ammunition storage. The quarry was cleared, and the sale officially went through in 1960. Nowadays, what was once the quarry is now a forbidden area. A perimeter fence surrounds it, with a double-locked gate bearing a sign, Ministry of Defense, Government Property, Keep Out. When engines on occasion need to bring wagons to the area, they are instructed to leave the wagons outside the gates. They then scurry away in fear, and only once they are out of sight does an elusive black beetle-like locomotive crawl out and take the wagons away. It's never been seen by the Skarloey engines, for it only goes past the gates after they've gone. The way Wilbert describes the current day operations of the base in the Island of Sodor book is hysterical to me. In reality, it's just an ammunition base. It's a place where stuff is stored. But he describes it as if it's Sodor's own Area 51, where some villainous Legion of Doom operatives carry out their evil plans. He certainly has a way with words, that Wilbert. As far as what the Black Beetle is, it's likely some sort of simplex locomotive, like these ones that were used in the trenches during the war. One exists on the Festiniog Railway today, and is named Marianne. But again, it's all up to our own imagination. After all, no one that we can talk to has ever actually seen it, right? This pick of the week is actually relevant to the video topic this time. It's A Beacon for Basil by Marvelous Mainland. This is the final chapter in Cam's Basil and the Electric Railway series, and I chose it because this chapter introduces the electric engines. I love his take on these characters, all designed and characterized in a way that feels at home in the CGI series. Basil himself is a cute character too, and fun to follow. It's a fun time. I recommend watching the whole series if you can. It's 4 episodes in total. Not a whole lot of updates on my end of things. Our house move stuff is all going according to plan, but other than that, not too much else to fill you all in on. The next big video will likely be the Season 16 retrospective. I know you all have been anticipating that one. Can't say for sure when it'll be out with the house move and everything, but it's coming. I do want to briefly speak about the tragic loss of Trevor Davis, a fellow Thomas fan who passed away around the start of April due to cancer. Now, I didn't know him personally, but he seemed like a kind soul. My condolences to his family. Rest in peace, Trevor. And that's all from me, everyone. Have a great day, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.